You're watching The Legal Breakdown. So, Glenn, Trump has now been indicted in the federal case regarding his efforts to steal the 2020 election. This is the big DOJ case we've been waiting for. I want to start with what I think is the biggest news, in my opinion. We have a judge assigned to this case. Can you speak about that judge and how you would expect them to preside over this case?
Yeah, Judge Tanya Chutkin is somebody that I actually tried murder cases against back in the day. She was with the Public Defender Service in Washington, D.C., and I have kept up with her over the years. I've been in her courtroom recently a number of times, and here is what I am thrilled to report. Tanya Chutkin is smart, honorable, ethical, fair. She is somebody who will ensure that Donald Trump will get a fair trial. She is somebody who will ensure that not only Donald Trump, but the American people will get a speedy trial, and the result will be reliable because she will preside over this case the way a judge should preside. So I, for one, was thrilled when I saw that Tanya Chutkin was the judge who drew this assignment.
How would you contrast this judge with Judge Cannon down in Florida?
I would have to call her the anti-Aileen Cannon. She is entirely independent. She's fair. She's honest and honorable. And I will say, so much of what we've seen out of Judge Cannon has raised, I think, reasonable questions about her impartiality. So as troubled as I have been with the appointment of Judge Cannon to preside over the Florida federal prosecution of Donald Trump, I am just as pleased that Judge Chutkin will be the presiding judge in Washington, D.C.
You've built one pretty dismal reputation for yourself. Once somebody calls you the anti-canon, and they call you honorable and fair. So I guess that really speaks for the reputation that, again, Judge Cannon has built for herself. You mentioned the prospect of a speedy trial, and Jack Smith, during his press conference, also mentioned a speedy trial. But the right to a speedy trial is already inherent. So why do you think that he made the conscious decision to expressly invoke this point specifically?
Yeah, I can't look into Jack Smith's mind, but I have my suspicions. First of all, he made other statements about bedrock rights of a defendant. For example, he said Donald Trump must be presumed innocent unless and until the evidence proves him guilty beyond a reasonable doubt in the court of law. That's a given. We all understand that. I think the reason he said, he has a right to a fair and speedy trial is just to emphasize that, this trial needs to move through the system appropriately, but quickly, in a timely manner. I mean, listen, the elephant in the room is the upcoming presidential election.
Right.
And I think everybody understands that these criminal trials, at least some of them, must be tried, must be completed before Americans go to the polls in November of 2024. Because in the event Donald Trump is the Republican nominee, I think everybody, whether you are for or against Donald Trump, I think everybody has a right to know whether they are casting their ballot for a convicted felon or for a completely exonerated, innocent man who was found not guilty in all of his trials. An extraordinarily unlikely result. But, listen, I think everybody understands that this case needs to be charged promptly. And I will say, Brian, that may be one of the reasons we see Donald Trump indicted alone, even though there are 6 co-conspirators who aren't named, but they are virtually identified by the role each one played.
Right.
So I think that's another way Jack Smith is trying to streamline the trial so I think that's another way Jack Smith is trying to streamline things and trying to guarantee that Donald Trump gets his speedy trial.
Can you just dig into that a little bit? Like, why was Trump the only one who is named and the others aren't? And what kind of impact does this have on the prosecution's ability to, I guess, move forward with swift accountability for him?
Well, as a general proposition, the more defendants you have, the more likely it is that a trial is going to bog down, that trial dates will be more difficult
Right.
to hold, because multiple defendants will try to come up with multiple reasons why they need a continuance. They need more time. They need the judge to kick the trial date down the road. So one defendant, that is a contained universe. And so the judge can hear whatever complaints Donald Trump has, can litigate his motions, can, address any claims that he needs a continuance, he needs more time. And it's much easier to get one defendant to trial promptly than to get a case involving a whole bunch of co-defendants. But, there's a lot of curiosity in this indictment. It is a beautifully crafted indictment. It's a compelling indictment, but it is not without some curiosity. For example, there are 6 co-defendants. First of all, let me note this. People may have heard the term unindicted co-defendant. That's not what Jack Smith calls these 6 people. Jack Smith calls them co-conspirators, not unindicted co-conspirators, just flat out co-conspirators. That could mean a couple of things. It could mean that these people are indicted and their indictment is under seal, soon to be unsealed. It may mean that they are about to be indicted. It could mean that some of them are already cooperating witnesses, people who have agreed to plead guilty, and maybe they haven't gone into court yet and entered their guilty plea, but they signed the paperwork with the prosecutors to plead guilty, cooperate, and testify against Trump. I suspect we're going to know more in the coming weeks and months, but it really is a curiosity that you have 6 co-conspirators, not unindicted co-conspirators, but 6 co-conspirators who aren't named, but who are in substance identified. But we are left to wonder, okay, what is the status of those 6 co-conspirators?
Now, how many years could Trump face in prison if he is ultimately convicted on the charges that were contained within the indictment?
Well, it's a bit of an academic exercise because you can only confine, a man for but one life, and
Right.
Donald Trump is
Not
already up.
exactly, not exactly a sprightly young guy anymore.
Yeah, so almost any sentence to incarceration, even for a few years, could sort of be tantamount to a life sentence for Trump. But I think if you add up the maximum punishment for each of the charged offenses, it's a total of 55 years. The obstructing an official proceeding, that is interfering with the electoral vote count, trying to get them to stop the steal or stop the certification, for openers, that's a 20-year offense. And the evidence that Donald Trump committed that crime is overwhelming. I would call it conclusive. Very hard for Donald Trump to, wiggle out from under being convicted of that particular crime. That's a 20-year offense for openers. So the other thing I will say, though, is even if he's convicted of all of these crimes and he's facing a 55-year maximum prison term, they will do what's called a guidelines calculation. And the guidelines calculation always comes in well below the maximum statutory punishment. So at the end of the day, he could be facing 10, 12, 15, 20 years rather than the full 55 in the event he's convicted on all counts.
That's good, though. This way, instead of getting out of prison when he's 135, he'll only be 100. So, Glenn, Trump's lawyer went on Fox and he claimed that the indictment against Trump means that I think his quote was exactly political speech now has been criminalized. So, what's your pushback to the Trump defense that he was just exercising his freedom of speech here?
Yeah, I guess I would inquire whether Trump's lawyer read even the first couple of pages of the indictment, because here is what Jack Smith says on page 2 in paragraph 3. The defendant, that would be Donald Trump, had a right, like every American, to speak publicly about the election and even to claim falsely that there had been outcome determinative fraud during the election and that he had won. Jack Smith says not only did Donald Trump have free speech rights, he was even entitled, at least it wasn't criminal, for him to lie to the American people about election fraud. These charges are not about the lies he told. These charges are about Donald Trump conspiring, that is, criminally agreeing with others to try to violate the laws of the United States. One of the charges is that he conspired to defraud the United States out of its right to a free and fair election. So it has nothing to do with his speech. It has everything to do with his criminal agreements with others and his criminal conduct in trying to carry out those conspiracies.
Glenn, what are next steps here now that this indictment has been unsealed?
Next step is for Donald Trump to show up in court on Thursday. He will be booked. He will be processed at the Washington field office of the FBI down on 4th Street, Northwest Washington, D.C. He will then come into court. He will be arraigned on the charges. He will undoubtedly enter a plea of not guilty. And then the judge will have to decide what to do with Donald Trump pending trial. I think this is unlikely, but I believe if the law was applied to him the way it is applied to others, because he is a danger to the community and because the evidentiary burden can be satisfied of clear and convincing evidence that he's a danger to the community, the law provides that he should be detained pending trial. I don't even know if that's a request Jack Smith will make. If I had to guess, I would say he probably won't. I do hope at a minimum, Jack Smith makes a request for at least some narrowly tailored restrictions on his speech and on his posts, because Donald Trump, day after day, in speeches and posts, lies to the American people. He tries to incite them and entice them into acting out, if not violently, certainly acting out based on those lies. And, he doesn't have a right to poison the well of public opinion. He doesn't have a right to poison all future jury pools. But that's what Donald Trump does all day, every day with his lies. And hopefully that will stop and the judge will order at least some narrowly tailored restrictions on his speech and on his posts.
And is that something we'd find out on Thursday?
That will be a battle. If that battle is going to be fought, it will be fought beginning on Thursday in court.
Okay. And finally, Glenn, this is also episode 100 of The Legal Breakdown. How about Donald Trump being indicted for trying to overturn the 2020 election as our centennial episode?
There is a certain poetic, even karmic justice to our 100th Legal Breakdown episode being the episode when we can talk about how the rule of law has asserted itself. Our democracy, in a very real sense, is now being protected. And I think there is a very good chance Donald Trump will be convicted and will be held accountable for what were democracy-ending crimes. And that is a good thing.
Well, I know I speak on behalf of all of our viewers who appreciate the mountain of legal knowledge that you've shared with us. And to those watching right now, I can speak on behalf of myself and Glenn in saying thank you all so much for making this series such a success for the first 100 episodes here. The whole reason that we launched this series was to keep as many people informed on what are otherwise pretty obscure legal information. So we're glad to have been able to be some help. And we're looking forward to another 100 episodes here. So with that said, I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
And I'm Glenn Kirshner.
You're watching The Legal Breakdown.